Hi, I am Claire DeBoer, and I'm the founding director of Center Stage Arts and Health at the Penn State Health Hershey Medical Center and the Penn State College of Medicine. I'm also the director of the Doctors Keenly Center for Humanistic Medicine in the Department of Humanities. So, Emily, Michael, and Bill, great to see your work. What motivated you to explore creatively this idea of masking? We'll start with Michael.
So we've known each other for quite a few years. When the pandemic forced so many of us into quarantine and isolation, we wanted to maintain our connections even more. We got to talking about doing some sort of collaborative project together, and then brainstorming themes for what that project might look like. And we started this fairly early during the pandemic. And one of the things that was on a lot of our minds was masks, and they were becoming ubiquitous. All of a sudden, we went from a world where very few people wore masks to one where everybody seemingly was wearing masks much of the time. And so we started talking about that and wondering, well, what does this mean? And how do we experience masks? And how might we use that as a prompt for our creativity to make some art around the general theme of masks?
I think, that's the way I recollect it too, Michael, is that largely this desire to stay connected to each other. And it was looking for something to help me feel less isolated during the pandemic and to have a creative outlet that felt like it had a purpose. Let's do something that we can get out into the world together.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that too. It was such an upside down world was kind of foisted upon us in a nanosecond. And it really actually seemed like a very interesting time for artists. Most people were bored at home. Artists are never bored at home because they can always do their work. And the whole mask thing, as Bill said, 1 minute we're not wearing masks, 1 minute everyone is masked. It was bizarre. You don't know what people's expressions are. You can't really see whether they're smiling. They can be foreboding. So there's a lot of different things that come up with the mask. And I think we all sort of investigated that in our work.
We all come from very different backgrounds and places. We're the three of us are within the Penn State system. I'm a physician and bioethicist at the Hershey Med Center, and Bill is a professor in the theater department in State College. And Emily is a painter at Penn State Abington. And so we all do art, but come at it from a different perspective and different stories about how we got here. And so that was something that was interesting for us to explore as well.
Well, the pandemic certainly and masks themselves elicit many different emotions. And I wonder if you might comment on the emotional quality of your work.
Yeah, I'll jump in just because my answer is what it is for most all of the work I make, whether it's performance-based work or visual work. Much of my time is spent making performances with my drawing. And the focus of the majority of my work is on mental health. As someone who lives with anxiety and depression and has most of my life, it became the focus of my work over the last 4.5 years when I started the Anxiety Project. I think we had about a half dozen or so hour-long conversations, the three of us, while we were gearing up to what this exhibit might be. And we got to talk all over the place about history of masking. The theater has a long, rich history of using masks for a variety of reasons, masks for protection, masks to hide identity. I talked a little bit about, for me, how my own face is a mask. I was able to hide anxiety and depression for decades until I decided to start talking about it by the mask I put on at the moment. So for me, it was like blending my theater training with my personal training in masking my mental health issues, right?
I'm writing about and drawing about emotions, but I sort of intellectualize it, I think. The reason we're wearing masks right now is to protect ourselves and others from this virus. But then I was like, well, what are some of the other unintended consequence of this whole masking phenomenon? Masks can protect us, but they hide our emotions and our feelings. And so for some folks, that's great. They don't want to share their emotions. Other people, that's really quite painful. So it has this emotional impact, but it's not just about hiding or revealing emotion. It can convey political meaning. For some strange quirk of history, mask has become a political issue, and people make statements, not only with messages that they write on their masks, but whether they wear a mask or don't wear a mask is now a reflection of what club you belong to, and what team you're on in a political way. So that's not exactly a response to what's the emotional impact on me, but I think it has this emotional overlay.
For me, the whole masking issue goes back many, obviously what Bill brought up, the plague doctor from medieval times with the beak was an incredible image that's been seared in my brain. And then it sort of became what our reality was for a moment. And going back in art history, you've got Picasso's Demoiselles d'Avignon from 1907, which is a group of nude women in a bordello, and some of them are wearing African masks. So there's a rich history of masks, and German expressionists have people wearing masks in their paintings. The whole idea of carnival, of, as Bill says, hiding and then disclosing. There's a really rich history. And for me, what my work was really about was kind of capturing sort of the bizarre comic side of it all, the surreal, almost cartoony thing about it. A lot of my work sort of takes on almost a cartoonish aspect. And one of the things that I kept coming back to last year when I was making work was the idea of this whole bunch of people in a raft with masks on, kind of bobbing about in a sea of debris, not really knowing where they're going. And that's sort of how it felt for me the entire time last year. It was kind of like we're blind. We don't know what's going on here. And so for me, the mask was really an emblem of that kind of, that kind of unknowingness of what we're getting into.
So I would love to take a moment, if you might share maybe your hopes of what the other side of that dialogue is, what people's experience, people have their own experience when they view art. So we don't dictate that, but what are some of your thoughts about the conversation, about the reception, how the art is received?
Yeah, that's a great question, Claire. And it's one of the things that's been in my mind since the thing that connects us as art makers is this, connection to graphic medicine and visual narratives, right? This combining of image and text. And in some sense, where the image does the majority of the work and the text is there to create another layer or a nuance, or one side of the dialogue is already stated because we're all using words in our work. I hope that people will sort of first kind of deeply consider what's said in the work, both visually and textually, and then start that conversation in their own head. There's a real opportunity for people to find a connection to it or to go, no, not my thing. Don't buy it. So I'm intrigued to see what happens.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is the storytelling around the pandemic and about masks and where they fit into it. And one of the projects that I worked on over this last year was exploring some family stories. I inherited this old photo album from a great uncle of mine. And interestingly, the time period of the photo album included the 1919 Great Flu pandemic. And so I got really interested in seeing, well, what was being documented by my relative during the flu pandemic. And what was so interesting to me about it is, when I look back at my great uncle's photos, if I hadn't known something about the history of, this flu pandemic that killed 50 million people worldwide and was considered one of the greatest public health disasters of all time, you never know any of that from looking at these photos. It was just sort of happy people doing all their regular activities. There's no masks, there's no social distancing, there's people hugging. And then I started looking at my own photo albums, not album, I take lots of photos, and, most of them for the last year was like family photos of us having fun, doing interesting things, interesting to me. And, again, there's no mask, there's no pandemic, there's no turmoil. And so that was something that was interesting to me. And so to respond to your question, when we tell these stories, are we being fully truthful or fully disclosing what's actually going on in the world around us? And so what is it that people are sharing about themselves when they tell stories? What is the historical record going to look like of this time? And where does masks wearing play into that?
So my work in general, I aim to really just connect with people on a pretty visceral level of emotion. And I'm hoping that kind of reaches out and makes someone remember something that happened to them, or that they can relate to, or it sort of resonates with them. So for instance, I did a series of masked drawings last year that were sort of staggered through the entire quarantine time and gave different thoughts that I was having at those specific moments. And when I look at them now, I can really just put myself back into that moment. For me, it's really about kind of remembering the intense details of these specific moments.
I've always hated masks. When I, as a doctor, when I had to wear masks, I just I'm thinking back for many years, I get a headache and it hurt my ears, and I just found it stifling and super unpleasant. And so I don't like masks. But then, when I have to start wearing them in the clinical setting, it's like, well, I got to do what I got to do, keep my patients safe, keep me safe, keep my family safe, and just do it. But for some, it's like this statement of such meaning that people are willing to, go to war over, whether you wear a mask or not. So I hope that the exhibit gets people to dialogue around the issue in a way that is productive and not, leading to further divisiveness in our society.
Well, I just have to echo what Michael's saying about the, it is really an incredible moment of this sort of piece of cloth becoming such a political statement.
Visual art allows us to express what's really difficult to express in words. Graphic art has words with it, so it seems a little more directed. I wonder what your thoughts are on the modality of graphic art for this very complex topic of masking.
One of the interesting things about the medium is that it does have words and it does have images, but sometimes the words and images reinforce one another and tell the same story, but sometimes they allow the artist to display the contradictions. You can have the image saying one thing and the word saying the exact opposite, and it reveals the tension that you're describing, where it might not be clear. It can actually confuse matters, but you put them together and you get an entirely new meaning. And I think it's really one of the most interesting things about the medium itself.
I mean, the whole idea of this kind of intersection of words and images is so powerful. You're taking two incredibly powerful mediums and kind of putting them together like a Reese peanut butter cup, and it comes out better than either of them on their own, I think. And the whole idea of us doing this piece on masks and the pandemic and graphic medicine is all tied in there. I mean, it's a perfect medium for talking about things that are difficult.
Yeah, it's always felt almost natural to me as a theater person, because in the theater, there's text that's always being spoken, right, by the actors, the characters, but they speak it in the context of costumes and props and scenery, all this visual information that, as Michael describes, can be in concert with what's being said, can be the opposite of what's being said, can create conflict and tension with what's being said. So it's always felt kind of natural to me, like another way of making theater is to create these little moments that put image and text together in some way that I hope will be, provocative to someone.